maybe it's time, by the way, for little noise for the people at the AV station. They are doing all the video and audio. Maybe you can say some applause for them there. Yeah! They are great. Let's go. So, Halloween is coming soon with scary things. Imagine this story. Imagine if you split your monolith, working monolith, on random boundaries. Imagine all these classes in your code, all your stuff that you have right now, and you draw pumpkins on it, and you decide that's my boundaries. And you do it again, and you split all your system like that on pumpkin boundaries. And what happens? Oh, we have to integrate there. And at runtime, they are calling each other all of the time. And one is unavailable, and everything is unavailable. And you get latency. Everything goes out of control. It's too slow. It fails half of the time. You are waiting for the other team. Oh, that's very scary, right? It's very Halloween time. So a few years ago, at a conference in London, at a domain-driven design conference, we had this guy from a microservice company called Simplicity itself, and he was calling every DDD practitioner for help in the microservice world, as please help us avoid the microservice disaster by defining the boundaries right. Microservices need domain-driven design, absolutely. In the keynote, we heard about that already. And microservices also need more than just domain-driven design. We need additional things like hexagonal architecture and these kind of things. And that's the content of the talk for today. So a little ad for myself. So my name is Cyril Martraire. On Twitter, I'm Cyriux. And I've been doing development for some time now. I'm mostly famous in Paris for launching the Paris Crafter community in 2011. So it's like 2,600 people joining every month. Not all of them each month, but like 60 of them each month, to practice how to become a better professional, like testing, domain-driven design, collaborating with the business, and all these things. I'm also the co-founder and technical CTO for this company called Arola. And at Arola, we are an IT consultants right now, and we are fan of everything DD, TDD, BDD, and DDD. And pretty much everywhere, including right now, today, I'm the official DDD guy. That's also me. All right, stop at the end of the ad. But I was very happy to see this morning this slide from Antonio. And you see on top, design and modeling, architecture, scaling, and testing. Maybe he put that on top, so maybe that's the most important thing, right? No, that's what I thought. And that's what I think as well. So today the talk is about everything about boundaries. So how do you partition your existing system? Like one monolith, how you partition it into bits, into pieces. Or if you start from scratch, how do we define the boundaries of the services you want to build? And there are, like everything, there are easy ways to partition. Like you do it the way it's intended to be. Like it's very easy, you follow the dots and you cut, very easy. And there is the less easy way to partition a system. And actually, I like this one best. So the easy way are split by layer. Like you see, you got your web layer, your logic, the data access, DB, whatever. You split one by one, easy, straightforward, just wrong. It will not work. It's gonna be slow, it's gonna be a lot of contention between your teams. Everything will fail. You could also split by technology. This one is easy too. Everything, all your EJBs. You still have EJBs, by the way? Who's got EJBs? None at all. Congratulations, you've done a good job removing them. But so you put your EJBs on, you split everything EJB, everything Mongo, everything Node, everything Java by generation, Java 5, Java 6, Java 7, Java 8. Very easy to do. It's just easy and absolutely wrong as well. Or you may be lucky, it may work, but you never know in advance. So still it doesn't work. And you could also split by entity, and this one is the most frequent by far. Even at microservices conference, you will see examples of splitting the customer service, the product service, and this one is totally easy and totally wrong as well. This one will kill you everywhere. So right, Cyril, thank you very much. We should not do like this, so how should we do? How do we define the boundaries correctly? Let me show you the solution. Wow, let's do it again. In 2003, Eric Evans published this book. So Eric, he's Eric. And in this book, he was advocating for defining your boundaries and partitioning your systems on functional areas. Everything about payment, everything about catalog, everything shipping, and etc. It was in 2003, and this works. But there's a thing. The thing is that it's not easy to do. So, in this talk, I really want one thing. I want you to understand really how to do the domain-driven contours correctly. And so we're gonna dig in depth into that. So the key concept here is what we call bounded context. Actually, I should have put it in a Halloween font because the name is scary, right? And the definition of bounded context is even more scarier. It's very abstract, reads like nonsense if you read in the book. But basically, the idea is that I want to package my code into modules like payment, and everything about payment should be there. And discounting and everything but discounting should be there. And the important thing is that this payment and this discounting area, they are functional, which means that if you talk about them with your business people, they understand it all. That's the way they think. That's the DDD perspective on it. And we follow almost all the time, we follow this heuristic that if you have different subdomains from the business domains, then you should align your bounded context on these subdomains. And actually, this heuristic works like 98% of the time, like very precise number, you see, very precisely. No, actually, it's not that precise, but which means basically, if I work at Amazon and in my mind I have Amazon split as having a catalog and having a shipping concerns and some recommendation area, then I would like to have my code split precisely this way and not in any other technical way. So basically, if I see it in 3 pieces like this, I would like my code to be exactly following the same boundaries. So basically, it's all about domain-driven. Domain-driven means the way we think in the business domain, we want to think the same way in the code domain. Straightforward, right? So basically, years ago, when I was a young developer, I was hearing things from CTOs and architects like, we want IT alignment with the business, blah, 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 blah. And for me, it was bullshit. Maybe it is for you as well. But basically, with domain-driven design, we do it every day. That's what we do. That's what we aim for. This alignment is just what we want. So how do we know we get it right? How do we know we got it right? Actually, we know afterwards. You can't know in advance. You can try to predict, you can try to find better heuristics and be better at it, but at the end, you only know one year after, 2 years after. And you got the boundaries right when you have the test of time showing that your boundaries were independent with each other. I guess across these 2 days, you'll hear independence a lot, because actually that's what we are aiming for with microservices. We want to partition big things into independent smaller things, so that we can partition the work, we can partition the deployment, we can split everything, we can separate things, so that we can deploy one independently, and etc. So basically, it's a heuristic, but actually it's also the end goal. The end goal is that we want to have different evolution and different feature and change requests by boundaries. And the domains and subdomains are the best predictors we know for that we know so far. Which is why bounded context and all these ideas belong to what we call in DDD strategic design, which is design not just so that it works right now, but so that it evolves well in the long term, like French cheese, something like this, or French wine, you see? Strategic French wine, strategic cheese. So let's consider a little story on it. You have a company selling shoes online, and you have a customer object. And in this customer object, you have the address. 3 lines for the address. And after a few months, you have your first enterprise customer, and they have a different billing address. So as developers, no problem. You know how to do that, right? Poof. Let's add a second set of address with a flag. Boom, it works. all right? All in the same class. This works right now. And then you also have to add these if statements everywhere, like are they the same or is the flag? And actually, it's a dirty example, but some people told me that this example is better than their own code because they test for null for the, the other fields. And you have that everywhere. So basically, the way we want to split into domains here is we want to split by business domains. And assuming that we acknowledge, we found out at this point, so I'm still not telling you how we do that, but we just found out that we had a shopping cart domain, a billing domain, and a shipping domain. And what we've done is that we've identified these 3 domains. We decided to split the code the same way. And so these are our 3 bounded contexts. So I introduced 2 there. And I will model my customer again, in the shipping bounded context and in the billing bounded context. And you know the thing? They changed their name. My customer is no longer a customer. In the account, it became an account for the billing, because a customer from the point of view of billing is what we call an account, at least here. And a customer from the point of view of shipping is what we call a recipient. And by the way, these names, the vocabulary we took, was enough to suggest these near synonyms. If you hear recipient, you already know it's about shipping. You see what I mean? So actually, it's a big hint suggesting your potential bounded context and your potential subdomains. So one more thing is that, of course, when you enter your address, most of the time you use the same address for both. So you have defaulting. And most of the time, you'll have the same data there and the same data there. Even worse, if you look at it, basically, we end up with a duplication of schema, same three fields in Java, same 3 fields in Java, and in addition to the duplication of data most of the time. So most of your colleagues, if you do that, they will say, oh, but that's massive duplication, stop it! Because we learned to do dry. And actually, you have to reply that, yes, but no duplication also means coupling. If you change one, you will have to change the other. And remember, we don't want coupling, we want independence, we want isolation. And independence implies some level of redundancy. It has to be. It's like a mathematical law of the universe. You can't escape that. So the way I see it in my mind is that we have a cursor, and we can choose, do I want dry, but I will get coupled, everything coupled together, or do I want isolation, and I will pay it, it will be at the expense of some redundancy. It's your call. It's a design decision, it's your call. If we want independence, we'll have to live with some dependency, with some redundancy, not to have any dependency. So that's the very important thing to keep in mind. So my question was, how does this age over time in the long run? Let's have a look. Fast forward 2 years after, my billing and my shipping recipient and account evolved. Oh, my account has a postbox in addition to the 3 lines of address. And a postbox doesn't make sense for shipping, right? You can't ship to a postbox. And my shipping has a door code. And you don't care about a door code for billing. It doesn't make sense. So actually, they evolve differently. What we've done here for the customer, we could have done the exact same way for the other important concept of e-commerce, which is the purchase. And when it comes to purchase, it gets even weirder. We even no longer have a one-to-one mapping between your purchase and the purchase from the billing point of view. From the billing point of view, we may have more than 1 billing unit. If you think about marketplace, like Price Minister, or if you buy to multiple vendors, they will bill you multiple times. And if they sell you, they ship when the things get available, you will have more than one delivery request. So it's not even one-to-one between all these things. A lot of bugs to escape by defining that and recognizing that it's not all the same thing. The purchase is a different thing from different bounded context. So at this point, you may be like, oh, Cyril, why make it so complicated? We've done without for years and it worked. It worked, yeah, sure. But let me show you one example that in real life, in real life, it's already the way it is. you are already modeled again and again and again on each internet service you are using right now. You are a friend on Facebook on some model from Facebook that they have, and they are not sharing anything with LinkedIn, I can tell you for sure. They are doing the redundancy thing already. It's already the way you are a candidate in LinkedIn, you are a colleague in Yammer, you are a committer in GitHub, and you are a collaborator in Slack. Different wording, different perspectives on the world, different models, independence, of course, between different companies. And by the way, I could also use the argument of authority, because actually, even the architect of Netflix, who basically invented microservices, says that you should do it the bandit context way. So now you agree with me now. So basically, at this point, to help understand this duplication thing, I drew a little diagram showing how things get better or not better depending on this thing. But whenever I show this diagram, people are like, "Oh, what?" Doesn't make any sense. What? So my colleague Arnaud Loyer suggested that I show the same thing using Java code alternatively. So maybe that's a good idea. So if you were at Devoxx, you recognize the example from our university. So we have some e-commerce code base, very simplified. It's organized by layer, every entities, every DAO, and services are a bit by functional area, but it's not consistent, like every code base I know in the wild. And we want to calculate the total weight of a purchase, of an order. So we know how to do that. We just get every item from the shopping cart. We get their ID, and then we load the item from the catalog to get its weight. And because they all implement the has weight interface, and we do the sum, and that's it. It works. Great. Except that, look at the import statements there. Oh yes, so we are depending on things from the shopping cart. Yeah, of course. And we are also depending on entities. And we also depend on the catalog service. And we also depend on the shipping, because we are in the shipping. We are shipping, and we depend on shopping cart, and we depend on catalog. That's high coupling and low cohesion there. What does it mean? This means that if you get the boundaries wrong, you're going to have a bad time at merge time, a lot of meetings, if different teams are managing the different bits, and also a hard time. You're going to have a bad time at runtime, because the entities and the services, they will call each other all the time and make your system slow and not very available. Basically, any change there, or any slowness or unavailabilities there, will propagate to your thing. And same thing, every problem there will propagate to your thing. Actually, you're coupled to every problem of everyone. It's not a good situation to be in. The alternative is to think bandit context and to say, here I recognize we have the catalog, the shipping, and the shopping cart. I put everything inside each. But you must have noticed that we need something more. In the shipping, we had to introduce this little shippable. And what we used to call an item there, or a book, became a shippable there. And here it's a cart item. We had to introduce a new the same concept in every layer, in every bandit context. You had to find the same concept again and again and again. That's the duplication we have to have. And with this, we can now compute the weight, and we do it on the delivery request. So now it has a home. And we just do all my shippables stream, and we get their weight and submit. And we depend on nobody else but ourselves. That's what it means to be independent. Okay? So yeah, the code is a bit small-ish, but I hope you can read anyway. And now we have low coupling and high cohesion. Of course, there's something on top. So we split this way. We recognize the functional areas, and we split by them. But the thing is that we had to do something more. We had to. So here I'm showing the REST controller calling the stuff, and when you do this put to your shopping cart and you want to update you have to compute here. This method is the important part. Actually, it's highlighted then. Here, whenever you get a shopping cart, there's some mapper somewhere between your shopping cart bandit context and your shipping bandit context, mapping the things from the shopping cart perspective into the perspective for your shipping. And from a shipping perspective, you don't care about items. You just care about things that can be shipped. And things that can be shipped, basically, they have a weight. Here, they just have a label and a weight. The label is for us, debuggers, to debug our code. And the weight is to do our job about shipping. And so we need the extra cost is redundancy and mapping. We have to do mapping, which we call anti-corruption layer in domain-driven design. And this mapping is very useful. That's what we need for the independence. That they are the thing that prevents one context from leaking to the next. That's the price to pay for your independence. So now my diagram there becomes more understandable. Catalog, shopping cart, shipping. You see, what used to be a book in the catalog is now an item in shopping cart and is a shippable for shipping. And the same thing, my customer actually is a visitor in the catalog, is a prospect in the shopping cart, and is a recipient when it comes to shipping. So that's good and that's bad. If you had the customer service, bandit context if you like, if you had the book one, they would be huge, and every set of features would have to do work in between. They would have to stretch between them. And actually, this probably means sockets, serialization, unavailability if you do synchronously, a lot of problems there. Okay? Okay, so basically so far I just solved the concept of bandit context, but I still didn't tell you how to identify the bandit context. The only thing we've seen is that actually we don't want to identify the bandit context. We want to align the bandit context to the domains, so we want to identify the domains. And so I'm going to show you some heuristics on how to find bandit context, how to find domains. An obvious one, is that very often the company departments you are working in, maybe a bit more than half of them are potential candidates for being bandit context. You see, marketing, sales, but they are kind of big domains. So then you still have it's a beginning, it's a basis. Then you can subdivide them into even more granular domains and bandit context. Well, it's never consistent anyway, because sometimes you have sales by region, geographic area, which is a totally different logic. So it's still a heuristic as a starting point. Another heuristic is if you use the same thing differently, it's no longer the same thing. It's a different thing. So different usage and the different usage of the same thing suggests different context. Actually, we've seen it already with the example of shipping. Some more examples. My book, in the catalog, it would be modeled like a book, picture, title, authors, etc. But when it comes to recommendation, actually, it no longer looks like a book. It's just like an ID that is often bought together with these other IDs. Yeah? So additional, again, using the example, the Amazon example, we have search, customer review, shopping cart. In the shopping cart, my book is not a book, it's just an item with a price, some discount restrictions or whatever, etc. I've said it already. So this bandit context thing is having different perspective on the same thing. And the concept from the real world can be extremely complex with multiple dimensions, but in your system, you never want to model them all at once. You want to have a look this way or this way, and you model it differently. My shipping book is not your search book. And my shipping was called actually, I just care about shippable, and it has nothing to do with my catalog, my book in my catalog. So this language thing, we've seen it already, is a different heuristics. Different subdomains usually speak different languages, just like in the dictionary. If you want the picture, poof. So we have the same word can have different meanings in different contexts, just like we do and that's the basic thing in domain-driven design, pay attention to the vocabulary, pay attention to the language we speak. So if people say customer, implicitly they mean sales. If they say segment, audience, they mean marketing. That's implicit. And for people, implicit works very well. But for software, it doesn't at all. That's why we have to be extremely precise. Another heuristic is that good domains usually end their names end with ing or shun, like pricing, shipping, billing, or recommendation, navigation, search. Oh shit, no. It's not a rule, absolute rule, but it's very often the case. It's the case because a good domain, what we call a domain, actually has some end goal. It has a purpose. Every domain has a precise purpose, and usually just one. Like selling sales, their purpose is to conclude the sales, to have the signature. And in English, when we have purpose verbs, action verbs like that, and we want to make them into nouns, we just add ing or shun. That's the way it works in English. So that's the reason why they very often they end up with ing or shun. So a little trick. So typically something called the customer doesn't fit already. So it's not a heuristic, it's a practice. The way we do in my company, when we do consulting for customers, how do we partition our system? We do a lot with all the heuristics you've seen, plus practice of interviewing everyone with a strong opinion on what their business is like. Every manager, every director, the CEO, the guy managing the ops, everyone. And we pay attention to what they say, what is their goal, how do they see the company, and how do they use their language as a way to have an idea of, oh, we have a marketing area there, and actually it's not called marketing, it's called traffic acquisition, it's called SEO. And we end up with cartographies like that of domains, subdomains, which contain even more subdomains, and we can go forever like that. So at some point we stop, of course. So this is an example from a customer that I've anonymized. So you see here, we see the big distribution part and the marketing part, and it's made of a lot of things, and again, they are split even more. And basically, all these potatoes, because actually in domain-driven design, we do potato diagrams, all these potatoes are candidates for a package or a microservice in your system. So I suggest to start not too granular, to start kind of big, and then you split when it goes too big, like cellular division, like cells dividing. So event storming is a very nice way, also, another practice to find out your boundaries, to find out your bounded context. Because at the end of an event storming, who knows about event storming, by the way? Just by name? Right. Who practiced? Yeah. So don't abuse event storming. It's a very precious tool. Don't use it for big things. So this thing could be a big thing to use it once a year or something. And when you at some point you can cluster the sticker notes, and the clustering of use cases together suggests very strongly potential bounded context. Very powerful tool. Another thing, sometimes you can have bounded context not just because of domain things. You can have, imagine you have the catalog thing, and the catalog thing is the big part of it is mostly read-only and very high volume. So maybe your catalog is made of two things, what we keep on calling the catalog, which is the read-only part, and what could be called maybe the feeds or all the feeding from your partners or whatever, feeding the catalog, or some people call them the product PIM, PIM, product management. And so this means that sometimes when you have if you have very strong technical constraints, they can also fragment domains. They can fragment domains into smaller bounded contexts that are not just because of domain things. Sometimes technical pressure is strong enough to fragment your stuff. So it happens, for instance, in finance, we do that a lot. The pricing in the front office, you want very fast pricing, even if it's not totally accurate. And you'll have the same pricing done differently for the accounting, which will be slower but very accurate. But anyway, many different, just to mention that. Typically, if you work at Google, everything I've said may be a bit different because the technical constraints are so huge that they may take precedence on the domain thing. So whenever we have a different bounded context, of course, we can also change the way we use technologies. We can change the technology for storage based on each. Shopping cart or payment, I want Oracle because I don't want to be fired if there is anything wrong there. But if I go catalog, I will never use Oracle. I will use something fast for read-only purposes, and that's it. And because if I have isolation thanks to my bandit context, I will also maybe put different teams on different bandit context. You can think Conway law at this point or whatever. So another way for you developers to find out potential bandit context is by looking at the code the way it is right now and the way it works already. Imagine if you look at the code, it's a set of functions, the data fields and methods. And if you try to cluster them into consistent, cohesive subsets, like this function is mostly using this field, this function is mostly using these two fields, and subdividing, finding cohesive subsets of behavior together with data. If you extract that, they may be very nice, very relevant boundaries for your system. So actually, if you are in machine learning, and in my company we are trying to experiment on that, you may also try to cluster your code based on the call stack as a way to suggest additional boundaries for your systems. So I say cluster here, and bandit context would be just the same thing with a different name. Another heuristics, because I promised to go through many heuristics. Another heuristics is that some bandit contexts are so standard that you can know in advance that they are bandit contexts for sure. Like everything search. Search is always a bandit context in its own because the perspective in the world, the view of the world of search is different from your nominal view. If you look at the internet, it's made of pages full of words. And for an internet search engine, it's just the opposite. It's words full of pages, so they use an inverse index, which is just a different model of the same thing. So de facto, there are different bandit contexts. Reporting is always a different bandit context. It's totally read-only, it's aggregated, it's taking a lot of things together. It's all about filtering, aggregating. Totally different audience as well. It doesn't have. It's totally different, so it's always something different. You know in advance that it can be something, so it can still be subdivided into reporting for this, reporting for that, sometime, whatever. Another heuristic as well is you can compare any system, even not in e-commerce, with a traditional decomposition from e-commerce. In e-commerce, that's the kind of standard, there is no such a thing as a standard bandit context, but kind of archetype of bandit context in e-commerce would look like this. At some point, and you see this continuity between them. Basically, a customer journey starts there with some marketing thing, SEO, acquisition, and it goes through your catalog until you put things into the basket. It's business people, they call that the sales funnel, basically. It's a kind of big funnel, channeling activity of people until you get money at the end, and until you have to do the post-sales stuff. So even if you are doing compiler optimization, you may compare the passes of your compiler, the lexing, parsing, all these things, to this. Actually, some people told me already that they saw big parallels between them. So it's a checklist, like kind of checklist for, am I missing something? If you are taking money from somebody, maybe you have some fraud detection somewhere already. One more, different shapes of things mean probably different bandit contexts. If you have a graph in some view, and if it's just a list in another, they are very different by design. And one more, if two teams are working in different directions of the company, if you have different bosses, then you'd better split already, because bosses are not made to agree with each other all the time. You see what I mean? It's not their job. Their job is to fight. So if you couple your code together there, you're gonna have a bad time. Okay, one more heuristic is if you can wait a little more, just wait, because after a while, it will become increasingly obvious that your system is made of this area, and this area. So hence the usual advice of don't split too early. Maybe it's simpler to have some bigger monolith and split it once you know better than speculating on partitioning upfront. Whew, that was a huge list of heuristics, right? So now we're gonna go to a lighter topic. And as a transition, I mentioned different bandit contexts, and each bandit context can be implemented differently. For instance, on this diagram, if I zoom at the fraud detection there, I zoom, boom, I may decide, for instance, to implement this one as one microservice following the hexagonal architecture style. Who's familiar with this? Who's familiar with the hexagonal style? Yeah, I was expecting some familiarity already. So I will go through it kind of quickly. So that's the old diagram for Malister. We presented it at Devoxx long ago, so now it's getting increasingly popular. Basically, you get the domain inside, you get the adapters all around, and REST controllers, MQ listeners, the data access objects are such adapters. It has some symmetries. They use me, I use them. So the API, the SPI. It also has this symmetry between testing and don't care about that. So hexagonal is good. Eat more. Eat hexagonal for breakfast. But basically, the idea of hexagonal is to separate some kind of complexity with a lot of combination on there, the domain logic, that you want to be as simple as possible without any mutation, side effect free, and separate that from the side effect, all the transactional stuff that you keep in your adapters, like calling, actually this one usually calls this one, like I receive an ID, find by ID, save, and commit the transaction. This kind of very, like 5 lines of Java there, plus an annotation doing some magic. So the idea of the hexagonal architecture is to separate these two kinds of complexity. And by the way, this morning I heard about service mesh. So I kind of think there's something to do between the adapters and the service mesh as a new way of doing things that used to be done by Spring and these things on the adapters. But just tell me if you try that. But the thing is that hexagonal architecture is getting so popular these days that everybody does hexagonal everywhere all the time. And it's wrong as well. We want to keep things simple, as simple as we can. And hexagonal is not always the simplest thing to be done on some services. So one thing you can do, some services, not others, some services can be hexagonal light by using your Hibernate POJOs directly within your domain model, no mapper, and just use domain services, all the rest as usual. So it's also a bit like DDD-like. But you can also use CRUD services. On a set of microservices, many of them would better be CRUD services using Grails, Ruby on Rails, whatever. CRUD is not that bad indeed. So it's not bad. Actually, in software, value judgments are always bad. Paraphrasing Carlo Pescio. You hear the irony? They are always bad. No, that's my way of paraphrasing Carlo. But the same way, if in many places, it's not worth doing domain-driven design in depth, it's not worth doing complex hexagonal architecture, just go CRUD. Even if it goes with active record, sometimes you'll get some plumbery from your framework and add some logic on top, 2 if statements, and you're done. In some services, just a few of them, you may go event sourcing as well, because it fits there. You get the idea? Basically, you won't use the same style of implementation everywhere in every service. Every bandit context is a small word in itself, and you will do things differently in each of them. So it's like city planning. You define the rules for the city, you define the guidance for the streets. The streets should abide by some rules. And then when it comes to buildings and houses, you do the way you like. So talking about large-scale structure, I like this kind of diagrams. At the bottom, we have services level, so we have architecture there, and it can be a different architecture for each service. And at the next level, you have the system point of view, and then you have the enterprise, so it fits within a bigger enterprise system. And microservices architecture definitely is at the middle. It's kind of system level. And that's the way I like to draw microservices architecture. Yeah, little pieces of shit. And you know the joke, monolith is a big, like this, is a big piece of shit, and microservices is just a distributed set of sheets. So the way I see it is that basically it's all about damage control. You know, it's like in your fridge. You have food, and whenever some food is beginning to rot, it will contaminate all the rest, and all the fridge will be rotten. With microservices, we put Tupperware boxes around, and whenever one is getting rotten, it doesn't contaminate immediately the other. So you end up with a lot of small rotten pieces of code but not the full fridge is not rotten as a whole. So it's far better. So yeah, that's my view on microservices, which are good. I'm totally pro microservices these days. So far, I lied to you. Bandit contexts are the same thing as services? Yes, mostly. But not strictly speaking, they are not. And for instance, if you have data pumps, it should be considered within the same Bandit context together with the microservice and the private database schema. It's one governance area, one Bandit context, one team. It should be done totally consistently within this boundary. I also lied to you when I said that all the Bandit contexts were independent completely. Actually, they are not. On the screen, you have a mashup, and your screen has to deal with all the microservices. So you can do it sync like this, or you can do it by introducing some backend for front-end. You've heard about this already, I guess. And this service is special. This one delegates to everyone else to prepare for the painting on the screen. So it delegates synchronously or asynchronously, whatever. And you can have one backend for front-end by audience or channel, desktop, mobile, B2C, B2B, large customer A, large customer B. And basically, they follow a different logic than Bandit context. BFFs are not Bandit context-ish. They are not domain-ish. Some people call them front services, and you have more front services than just that. Sometimes you have dashboards, all these kind of other things that are totally UI-driven. And they follow a logic of being audience or channel-driven, not by domain-driven. Like here, different for SoundCloud, they have different partners, different audience, different kind of front-ish integration. And there's another kind of service, which I call proxy or gateway services. They do nothing on their own. They delegate everything to something external, but they have a persistence for their config. They have a cache, for instance, to reduce the billing cost, and they audit everything that comes in and comes out. So they do have some persistence, but they don't do anything by themselves. So they come in two flavors as a proxy, and here, this payment thing is my domain of payment in my company, even though it doesn't do anything but delegated everything to Stripe. And sometimes, so basically this idea is like the good old repository pattern from DDD. You know, I take something not domain, and I turn it into something domain in disguise so that it looks good in my system. The same idea that we had for hexagonal architecture in the small, we have it here in the large. The other kind is more technical. My email thing delegates to my SMTP server. So here they are not Bandit contexts, they are infrastructure things. You see the parallel with the hexagonal thing that we've seen so far? You kind of see me coming already. And another thing, of course, Bandit contexts are not totally independent, so I lied to you as well. They have to talk to each other synchronously or asynchronously using some messaging system. If we put all that together, we get what I would call hexagonal at scale. Yeah! So I coin this word. You have services. If you draw your system perimeter, you would have services inside and services outside of two different kinds. Inside, you have the business, your core business, different domains, different subdomains. Outside, you get everything about integration. So front services, gateways, and inside, but at the edge, you get your proxies, which also calls external services. And we have different ways of thinking. Externally, you are thinking audience, channel, like ports, but it's a large-scale point of view. Internally, you are thinking Bandit context, domains, etc. Different size. And by the way, I noticed that most of the time you would go a lot of synchronous outside and more asynchronous inside. So I'm late. And this thing is what we call, Phil Calzado, who invented BNB backend for frontend, call it the perimeter. The perimeter we have control on. And some customers call it the platform. Actually, it's something that we could call the product, what we are selling to the rest of the company or selling outside. And it's like this perimeter, this inside of the domain, is, if we think, it's as if we were a SaaS company, and is the product we are selling to our end users or to hexagonal people. So, hexagonal at scale, trademark, and that's it. So in closing, buy my book, of course, It has nothing to do with what I said, but it's a good book. And it's going to be on Amazon, it's going to be on Addison Wesley soon, so you can buy it in print very, very soon. And as a conclusion, what we've seen a parallel between large-scale hexagonal thinking that is totally reused from small-scale hexagonal that we knew already. So basically, invest time into learning DDD, hexagonal, and everything but coupling and cohesion, because they are essential skills that are reusable even in places and sizes that you'd never expect. Thank you very much. So we are late, so very sorry, but I still have time for question afterward.